possible, and we really appreciate it. If you have any membership questions, you're welcome to ask me, and we have brochures in the back on the check-in table as well. We have a wonderful program this evening brought to us by fellow alumnus, Bill Beigel, and Bill kindly waived his speaking fee as well so that he can bring this home to us. We really appreciate it. And to introduce Bill, we have Daryl Johnson here tonight. Daryl is also military. He is a retired colonel in Special Forces. When he was at UCLA, he served in the Braun Brigade. He was the commander of the Braun Brigade here at UCLA. He has many other affiliations here also. He was a recipient of the 2016 University Service Award. He is involved in the campaign cabinet. And he's also an honorary board member on the UCLA Veterans Network. And as is General John Daly. And General Daly, who is at the Smithsonian in Washington, couldn't be here, but he wrote a letter. And Daryl is going to read the letter, and he's going to introduce our speaker. And so I'd like to bring Daryl up. Daryl, please.
Good evening to my fellow Bruins and to my vets. It's great that we're honoring all our veterans at this time, and I want to thank everyone that served and that will serve in the future, and for all the support for your loved ones that have served. So I have a letter I'd like to read from General Daly. And it says, fellow Bruins and retired United States Marine Corps 4-star general earned a Bachelor of Science degree from UCLA in 1956. In honor of tonight's event, General Daly sends these words of encouragement. Good evening from Washington and the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum. I was delighted to hear that fellow alumnus William Beigel is presenting his research into the lives and last deeds of fallen warriors in World War II to commemorate this Veterans Day. As a seminal point in human history and our nation's World War II and America's participation in it should live in the current consciousness of our country. This moment in history where men and women fought and sacrificed to preserve the ideals and the fact of American democracy in the face of grievous assault. Among those men and women are 275 fallen members of our Braun family, whom Bill Beigel has painstakingly documented and honored through his research, for their roles in preserving freedom in our great nation and throughout the world. I am proud to take part in this event to honor those young men and women who, like many of our students now, were barely out of their teens when they answered the call to defend this home and our country. I join you in honoring them through the recounting of their stories, their deeds, and who they were as students as well as people. I urge you to remember as you walk our beloved UCLA campus, the heroes who have walked here before and those who walk among us now. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our speaker tonight, fellow Braun, William Beigel.
Thank you for your service to our country, Colonel Johnson. And thank you very much for that kind introduction. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
I'm honored to have been invited to speak at UCLA this Veterans Day. In addition to having studied here myself, my wife Dawn, who is with me here tonight, was a scholarship gymnast. Dawn and I met while we were both students here. So I suppose I can thank UCLA for my 2 degrees, plus my wonderful wife and our 2 kids. Dawn's sister and father also earned degrees at UCLA. A contemporary Bruin, my niece Rebecca, who is also here tonight, will graduate after winter quarter with a BS in microbiology, immunology, and molecular genetics. Not unlike one of the lady Bruins that we're going to talk about tonight. In the words of a past president delivered at Arlington National Cemetery, those who live today remember those who do not. Those who know freedom remember today those who gave up life for freedom. Your attendance here honors all veterans, those serving today, our retired veterans like Colonel Johnson, also those who served honorably and have passed away, as well as our fellow Bruins who died in World War II. I thank you all sincerely for coming here tonight. How many veterans are here, either active or retired? Would you mind standing so that we can express our thanks quickly? Thank you each for your service. I won't ask you to stand, but how many people here have a connection to World War II? A relative or friend who served and came home, or someone who died in the war? If you're looking around, almost everybody's got their hand up. That's great. Does anyone here have a connection to a Bruin who died in World War II? Okay. I became interested in World War II when I was 12 or 13, when I got a Time Life book about World War II. One of those big, thick books with all the pictures in it. And what grabbed me in the book was this photo right here. That's a B-17 bomber nicknamed Wee Willie. And Wee Willie, as you can see, is in very bad shape there, going down over Germany late in the war. And something about that photo really grabbed me. And I think what it was I looked and I thought, who were the guys in that plane? What happened to them? Where were they from? What was their mission that day? Did it even accomplish anything for the war? And I really got interested thinking about that. Now, I do have a personal connection to my World War II work, and that is my dad. He grew up in Detroit, Michigan, where he lived with his cousin, Morris. Morris was about 8 years older than my dad, and he was kind of the older brother my dad never had. My dad would tell me about how excited he was when Morris would come back home on leave in his brand new Air Corps uniform. My dad would just go on and on about how excited he was about Morris. But the story was a sad one, because he would always end it by saying, all that his family ever knew and all that I ever knew was that he was missing in action over Germany in 1943. And that was it. And so one day when my dad was about 70, I decided to see if I could find out what happened to his cousin. Anyway, what happened to his cousin was an incredible story, and it ended up getting me hooked on this kind of personal research. As you have heard, I have spent the last 8 years researching the men and women from UCLA who made the ultimate sacrifice in World War II. In 2009, I found a list that UCLA published with the names of 192 Bruins that died in World War II. Over time, I discovered another 81 that died in the war. Of course, many more brave Bruins joined up in defense of freedom and came home. Tonight, though, we will remember the lives and sacrifice of several fellow Bruins who served and died during World War II. Their stories are tragic. Yet to gloss over the sadness of their deaths is to minimize their loss and to risk forgetting. But tonight, through stories and photographs, we will remember their lives, their vibrancy, and their legacy of honor. Certainly, our most famous Bruin from World War II was Captain Francis Way. Anybody here heard of Francis Way? Good, a few people have. I'm glad. You may know that he was recently inducted into the UCLA Hall of Fame. Francis and his brothers were part of a successful family of Chinese descent from Hawaii. Francis played quarterback on the football team. He also ran track, and I found a great photo of him playing intramural basketball when he was at school here. And I played intramural basketball here, as well as one of my friends who's here tonight too. So it was nice to see Francis in that informal sort of setting. He joined the Army September 27th, 1941, 2.5 months prior to the attack on Pearl Harbor. He rose quickly through the ranks, and by October 1944, he was a captain with the 34th Infantry Regiment. On October 22nd, 1944, his unit landed at a place called San Pedro Beach on the island of Leyte in the Philippines. What happened next is taken from his Medal of Honor citation. Finding the first 4 waves of American soldiers leaderless, disorganized, and pinned down on the open beach, he immediately assumed command, issuing clear and concise orders and disregarding heavy enemy machine gun and rifle fire. He began to move inland through the rice paddies without any cover. The men, inspired by his cool demeanor and heroic example, rose from their positions and followed him. During the advance, Captain Way repeatedly determined the locations of enemy strong points by deliberately exposing himself to draw their fire. In leading an assault upon the last remaining Japanese pillbox, he was killed by his occupants. Among the personal effects found on his body were a pocket knife, a sewing kit, and his class of 1940 UCLA gold ring. He's buried in the Punchbowl Cemetery in his native Hawaii. Now tonight, I want to acquaint you with some other Bruins, the ones you've never heard of. I feel like I know each of them personally, and I'd like for you to get to know them too. One of these unknowns was Lieutenant Junior Grade Wallace M. Bonaparte, U.S. Navy. Wallace was from Los Angeles and a member of the class of 1936. He was the drum major for the military band and chairman of the campus musical organizations. After he graduated, he went to law school, became an attorney, and got married. But he was not in the legal world for long. He joined the Navy and received his commission as an ensign in July of 1942. Wallace had been in the Navy for about a year when he wrote this remarkable letter to his parents. Now, he sent the letter to his uncle to be given to mom and dad only in the event of his death. I had hoped never to have to write this, for over a long period, even after being overseas, I have been safe and secure. But lately, I've been in some tough spots. I do not expect to die in this war, no one does. But I am playing on my luck more and more. Only in the event that it does not hold out will you ever see this letter. After a while, I ceased to think of dying. Now I never do, except in moments like this, where I do so for a definite purpose. My primary thoughts out here are of life, of winning the war, and returning to you someday and my dear wife. Several things strike me about Wallace's letter. His calm in the midst of chaos, his devotion to his family, and his willingness to serve. He was a man of honor. We're going to learn more about Lieutenant Junior Grade Bonaparte, but first I want to mention what I call the raw statistics of sacrifice made by UCLA men and women in World War II, followed by stories of some other sacrifices. Of the 273 UCLA men and women we know to have died in the war, 98 belonged to the Army, another 98 belonged to the Air Corps, but today is the Air Force, 39 served in the Navy, and 20 were Marines. You might be interested to know who were the first and the last Bruins to die in the war. The first was Seaman First Class Robert F. Conrad, killed in the sinking of the USS Arizona at Pearl Harbor, December 7, 1941. Robert was a graduate of Venice High School, class of spring 1940. So he probably just had time to pick up his books in his class schedule before he had to go off to war. The last Bruin to lose his life near the end of the war was First Lieutenant Seymour Freed, who served with a truck unit. He died of polio in September of 1945 in a little place called Lido, India. Seymour had joined the Army in May of 1942, and it's likely he spent most of his time overseas involved in the construction of the vital Lido Road. This was a 1,000-mile highway going through India, Burma, and China, built to supply the Chinese Army during the war. The road was dug through some of the most hostile, uncivilized, and unforgiving terrain on Earth. In a time when few women served in the military, 4 of our dead were women. One of these was hospital apprentice First Class Marilyn Weeks of nearby Culver City, who graduated from UCLA with a BS in microbiology like my niece Rebecca. How many women were being awarded degrees in microbiology in 1944, I wonder? A lover of the outdoors, Marilyn's real passion was science, in particular the study of bacteria and microscopic pathogens. As an undergrad, she worked in the UCLA Medical Lab as a research assistant in the study of malaria. As important as this work was, Marilyn was compelled to help in the war effort. She joined the Navy, where she was an apprentice at a naval hospital in Seattle. There, she likely witnessed the suffering of those injured in training missions, and probably have been shipped home for treatment of wounds received in battle, assisting in the care of those who were injured or ill. In February of 1945, Marilyn herself became a patient at the hospital. During a routine dental procedure, she contracted a septic infection and died only a few days later, despite desperate attempts to save her. Tragically, Marilyn Weech's life was taken at the age of 22 by a microorganism she had passionately studied, and from an infection for which perhaps she hoped to someday contribute to a cure. Who knows what kind of life she might have led? And isn't that the question we are here to ask about each of these men and women? The other 3 UCLA women who died in service were WASP flyers, women recruited by the Air Force to take over flying duties, typically ferrying aircraft from place to place so that male flyers could be sent overseas to fight. Within a 6-month span in 1944, all 3 of our UCLA WASP flyers died in flight accidents in the United States. I have not found any other American university to have lost 4 women in World War II. And on the subject of flight training accidents and other stateside aerial disasters, a staggering 45 of our Bruins died this way in the war. To put this in context, thousands and thousands of aircraft were being rushed into production. The aircraft were maintained and serviced by men that were also new to their work. The flyers themselves, well, they were new to this too. And the military loved college-educated flyers to crew their planes. One fellow alum who died in a tragic stateside flight accident was Rudy J. Binder, a geology student who received his Bachelor of Science in 1940. Hailing from El Segundo, he was an award winner as a rifle shot in high school. At UCLA, he was a swimmer and a member of the Scabbard and Blade Club. He looks like he has life by the tail there, doesn't he? Shortly after Pearl Harbor was bombed, the U.S. military was greatly concerned that Japanese submarines and aircraft might be preparing to launch an attack on the West Coast. Constant aerial patrols were launched in early 1942 to spot a possible attack. One such patrol left tiny Moon Island Airport near Aberdeen, Washington, early in the morning of February 20th, 1942. Flying as observer on this mission was Lieutenant Binder. The aircraft took to the air, but only a few moments later, a man on the flight line at the airport reported he had heard the sound of a plane crashing in the nearby Puget Sound. Immediately, a patrol plane took off looking for the crashed aircraft. An oil slick in the area where Rudy's plane went down was soon spotted. A Navy patrol plane joined the search, but no luck. Another search was initiated the next day. This time, a partially submerged piece of landing gear was spotted, and a small boat was sent to the spot. But by the time the vessel arrived, the landing gear was nowhere to be found. Finally, a few days later, a Coast Guard cutter found the wreckage of the plane, and raising it to the surface, found the remains of Rudy and his pilot. Rudy is buried in Inglewood Park Cemetery. The 1940 UCLA yearbook includes a photo of Rudy with this description: Rudy Binder is that rare jewel, a good man and an SAE too. Wears an Army uniform when he has to, studies geology when he has to, and acts normal the rest of the time. Strong and silent, a man's man. 2 of our most renowned UCLA alumni were also flyers, Fred Kovac and Don Braun, who served as back-to-back student body presidents in 1939 and 1940. Fred was from Los Angeles and was student body president for the 1938-1939 term. He starred on the UCLA football team with Francis Wade and soon-to-be baseball great Jackie Robinson. Incidentally, UCLA was very progressive for these times, being one of the few schools with integrated athletic teams during these years of rampant racial segregation. Fred was also a member of JV crew, and I wonder how many of our current football players are also on the crew team. Fred participated in the University Religious Conference and was a member of the Scabbard and Blade Club. He joined the Air Corps just a few weeks before Pearl Harbor and was rapidly promoted to the rank of major. On December 30th, 1943, Fred and his B-24 bomber crew were shot down over New Ireland Island in the Pacific. Fred survived the crash, but he was captured, taken prisoner, and held at the huge Japanese military base at Rabaul, New Guinea, rather than at a dedicated POW camp. As the prisoners were held there in secret, the Allies were unaware of their presence at this giant military installation. On March 5th, 1944, the military complex at Rabaul was bombed by the U.S. Air Force. Now, stories conflict at this point. Fred may have been killed when the base was bombed. He may have been executed by the Japanese. We don't know for certain. His remains, though, were cremated, together with those of his fellow prisoners. After the war, the United States recovered the remains and brought them home to the Jefferson Barracks in St. Louis, where they were all buried in a group burial. You might not know this, but the United States is the only nation out of 150 combatants from World War II to locate, identify, and repatriate their dead. This effort remains unique in world history. Fred's story comprises a chapter in my upcoming book on how America brought home our war dead from overseas. Now, there is one other sad note about Fred. He is not included on the master list of all American World War II dead prepared in 1946. I don't know why. But years ago, I submitted his name for inclusion in the National World War II Memorial website, so you can find it there. And now all of you know his name and remember him as well. Don Evan Braun, also of Los Angeles, was the son of famed actor and comedian Joe E. Braun. Some of the people in this room might remember him. He's kind of an old timer now. Don was student body president for the 1940 term, the year after Fred. Don was a guard on the basketball team and a member of the Pershing Rifles drill team. After enlisting in the Air Force, he was assigned to the Air Transport Command with the rank of captain. On October 8, 1942, he departed from Palm Springs on an aircraft ferrying mission to Las Vegas. He was piloting a dive bomber when one of the engines went out. He tried to return to his base in Palm Springs, but the aircraft crashed just north of the runway. Don briefly survived the crash and was able to tell the investigators what had occurred, but he died a few moments later. After his death, his father, Joe E. Braun, remained actively involved with UCLA, sponsoring a number of promising athletes. Joe was 50 when Don died, so although he was too old to enlist, he traveled thousands of miles at his own expense, entertaining American troops. He was among the first entertainers to do this, even before Bob Hope, visiting the Caribbean, Alaska, and the Philippines. In 1954, Don was made an honorary alumnus of UCLA. One more note about Joe. He testified before the House Immigration Committee in support of a bill that would allow Jewish children from Germany into the United States. He and his wife adopted 2 refugee children who became sisters to Don. I mentioned Joe E. Braun in part because he and his son Don exemplify themes I noticed throughout my research of UCLA's World War II heroes: honor in all its forms and willingness to serve. 5 UCLA men of Asian American background were lost in World War II. Here are some of their stories. We've already discussed Captain Francis Wei, who to this day remains the only Chinese American to receive the Medal of Honor. 3 of our Bruin brothers who lost their lives served with the renowned 442nd Regimental Combat Team, made up almost entirely of Japanese Americans. The 442nd was an effective and storied fighting force, all the more remarkable for their extreme bravery in battle, while at the same time, many of their families languished in detention camps in the United States, labeled as disloyal aliens by their government. All 3 of the Bruins with the 442nd were killed in Italy. One of them was Lieutenant Hitoshi Mo Yonemura. Mo was a winner of the UCLA Honor Award and a well-known yell leader at football games. He was also student body treasurer for his class. However, in May of 1942, he and his family were uprooted and forced to move to Hart Mountain, Wyoming, where they were interred. At Hart Mountain, Mo joined the Army, even though the rest of his family was being treated that way, and was eventually assigned to the Cannon Company of the 442nd. Fighting in the mountainous terrain near Marciano, Italy, he was killed in action April 21st, 1945, by gunshot wounds to the chest only 2 weeks before the end of the war. He was awarded the Silver Star for his actions that day. He's buried at Golden Gate National Cemetery in San Bruno, California. One other was technician 5th grade Larry A. Nepomuceno. Larry graduated with a BA in history in 1939 and was a member of the Bruin Philippine Club, and also participated in fencing and track. He entered the Army as a civilian affairs soldier. Larry was killed 7 days after Francis Way, when the deck of his ship took a direct hit while landing on a beach. His remains were never found. There was one Olympian in our group, Second Lieutenant Farid Sameka, winner of the silver medal in platform diving in 1928. Farid attended UCLA in 1935, while he was also the coach of the university's diving team. He was a matinee idol of sorts who appeared in 2 documentaries and was a stunt double in a 3rd film, The Seas Beneath. Egyptian by birth, Farid became an American citizen in 1942. A year later, while serving as an aerial photographer aboard a B-24 bomber, he was shot down over present-day Indonesia. He is believed to have died as a POW, but since he was never seen or heard from again, we'll probably never know. I've only touched on Farid's career as a diver and performer, yet he was willing to serve when he saw the need. Again, willingness and honor. One other Bruin who received a degree of fame was First Lieutenant Walter L. Rigoli. Walt, from Glendale, was the subject of a feature in the Strange as It Seems cartoon strip of the day, similar to Ripley's Believe It or Not. The feature, which included a very nice pen and ink drawing of him, made much of the way that the number 13 kept coming up in his life. For example, he was born September 13th, he was married on May 13th, his first plane flew 13 missions, and similar coincidences. Walt was the co-pilot of a B-17, flying in one of the lead positions on the first daylight bombing raid to Berlin, Germany in 1944. Near the target, the bomber was hit by anti-aircraft fire, and one of the engines began to burn. The bomber glided out of the formation with fire spreading across the plane. Then it exploded and fell toward the ground. Remarkably, of the 12 men on board, 4 lived. Sadly, Walt was not one of them. Although his parents were informed of his death, they had an agonizing wait of 7 years until 1951 before they were finally informed that his remains could not be located and that he was permanently missing in action. But in what must have seemed like a miracle to them, a year later, his remains were finally found in a grave that was believed to have held an English flyer. However, the remains were in the Russian zone of occupation in the former East Germany, and it was not until 1956, 12 years after he died, that his remains were finally brought home. He's buried in Rose Hills Memorial Park in Whittier, next to his parents, Ronaldo and Lorilla, who both outlived him by more than 40 years. Many Americans consider June 6, 1944, D-Day, as the most important day of the war. 2 of our Bruins died in Normandy that day, and I'll tell you about one of them. He was Second Lieutenant Aaron E. Denstead Jr. of San Diego, known as Lieutenant Denny to his men. He was in command of Rifle Company F of the 16th Infantry Regiment. As soon as he hit the beach, he was killed by machine gun fire, his first and only day in combat. Infantrymen serving in rifle companies, such as Aaron, had a very low survivability rate in the war. To put it another way, their chances of becoming a casualty, killed, wounded, prisoner of war, missing, were usually figured to be greater than 100%. Our Bruin infantrymen died all over the world, from places like Lütscheid, Germany, to the Ardennes Woods, to Tobaro, Okinawa, to Saint-Lô, France, and Livorno, Italy, and to El Qatar Hill, Tunisia. We've discussed infantrymen and pilots in the Army and the Air Corps. Now let's talk about our Bruins in the Navy. There were, in fact, 2 naval vessels named in honor of fallen Bruins. The USS Sade was a destroyer escort named in honor of Ensign Daniel Sade, shot down over Kwajalein Atoll February 2nd, 1942, one of the very first Bruins to die in combat. On that day, Ensign Sade took off in his dauntless dive bomber from the deck of the aircraft carrier USS Enterprise on a bombing raid over the Japanese-occupied Marshall Islands. He was last seen making a water landing about 1 mile north of the tiny island of Roy. Ensign Daniel Sade and his gunner, David Franklin Grogg, disappeared beneath the water, their bodies never found. We'll speak more about missing in actions in a few moments, but you might be interested to know about an organized effort to recover the remains of downed Navy flyers around those islands. The project is called the Kwajalein MIA Project, founded by retired Navy veteran and expert diver Dan Farnham, who, along with a team of other divers, researchers, historians, and archaeologists, searched the waters of the Kwajalein Atoll for underwater wreck sites with the crew still inside. I'm fortunate to be a researcher on that team. As I mentioned, Ensign Sade and his gunner were never recovered. Their wreck may look something like this one, which is one of the naval crashes on the lagoon side of the atoll, located by the Kwajalein MIA project team, a couple of 100 feet down. Sadly, Ensign Sade's plane went down in water that is 10,000 to 16,000 feet deep, unrecoverable with the technology available. The other Navy ship was named for Lieutenant Seymour Ruchampion. Seymour was a business major from New York, and he won the Navy Cross for his actions the day he died, when he took a damage control party below decks to put out a dangerous fire and was never seen again. In a terrible coincidence, another Bruin, Ensign Curtis L. Riney, was aboard the same ship with Lieutenant Ruchampion, and like him, died that day. Both Daniel Sade and Seymour Ruchampion were Jewish Americans, again, in appreciation of the diversity in UCLA then as now. We haven't yet talked about the Bruins in the Marines, so I'll mention one of them. Major Robert C. Mays was from Modesto, and like so many of our men, showed great leadership, honor, and incredible bravery. Still in his 20s, he was promoted to commander of Marine Fighter Squadron 511. And I might ask, we've got some younger veterans here, how many 27-year-olds are in command of Marine Fighter Squadrons in today's world? And we know the answer is none. So it's really an incredible accomplishment for Major Mays. In the battle for Okinawa, Major Mays was shot down off small Ishigaki Island and was killed. Following his death, he was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. The Distinguished Flying Cross citation reads, in part, for heroism and extraordinary achievement in aerial flight as commanding officer of Marine Fighting Squadron 511. And I'm going to go off my script a little here to say that not only was he flying fighter missions, but he had to direct all the other guys in his squadron on their missions, plus come up with targets. So for a 27-year-old man, I think this guy was incredible. The citation continues. Mortally wounded in an attack against vital enemy shipping, Major Mays, by his cool courage and superb airmanship throughout these important missions, has upheld the highest traditions of the United States Naval Service. He gallantly gave his life for his country. Robert Mays graduated from UCLA in 1940 with a BA in economics. When he died, he was 27 years old. By now, we have covered each branch of service with Bruin casualties. Most of the men were returned home to the U.S. for burial, some buried overseas at the request of their families. But what of those who couldn't be found? Among the more than 70,000 Americans that are missing in action from World War II, 46 of our Bruins remain on eternal patrol. One day in March of 1945, the huge B-29 superfortresses rolled down the runway on the small Pacific island of Saipan. Their target that day was Nagoya, Japan. 285 bombers were dispatched against the target. 284 returned. Aboard the one bomber that didn't return was Braun alumnus Staff Sergeant Victor Cotton. A member of the Pershing Rifles, 24-year-old Victor from Los Angeles had completed 2 years at UCLA before joining the Air Corps. In addition to his time as a student, he also worked at a power station. In the military, his specialty was as a radar operator aboard a B-29. On that day, just a few minutes after takeoff, one of the engines of his bomber was observed to be on fire, so the plane ditched in the sea. But only about 10 miles from where it took off. The weather was clear, the sea was calm. Other bombers circled the downed aircraft, now floating on swells, to mark its location. Yet, when rescue craft arrived at the scene, there was no sign of the aircraft at all, nor any evidence of survivors. 9 months later, Victor's mother, Esther, was contacted by the family of one of the other men lost in the crash. Esther was asked to sign a petition to be delivered to the Air Corps to ask them to search for the lost bomber and attempt to bring home the remains of the men who had died on board. There was one major problem with this. The bomber had sunk somewhere over the Marianas Trench, the deepest part of all the world's oceans. There's no record as to whether or not Esther signed the petition, but it was forwarded on to the Air Corps. Their official response was terse. This operation is not deemed practicable due to the extreme depth of the ocean where the B-29 went down, and the probability of further loss of life in the attempt. Victor Cotton, full of Bruin pride, American pride, and the kind of honor that drove him to leave the comforts of home in defense of freedom, rests at sea with his comrades to this day. Finally, returning again to Wallace Bonaparte. On Saturday, September 4th, 1943, Lieutenant Bonaparte's ship was landing Australian troops near the north coast of New Guinea when it was attacked by Japanese dive bombers. 2 bombs struck the ship. Remarkably, it was not sunk, but flying shrapnel took its toll. One of the men killed was Lieutenant Bonaparte. When word came of his nephew's death, Lieutenant Bonaparte's uncle delivered the letter to Wallace's parents. Believing that their son's words might comfort others amidst the tragedy of war, Mr. and Mrs. Bonaparte allowed the letter to be published, and soon it graced the front page along with a smiling photo of their son on dozens and dozens of newspapers all across the country. In getting to know each of these men and women over the past many years, I believe that what Wallace Bonaparte wrote was in the hearts of so many of his fellow Bruins, as his letter to his parents concluded. So, the fact that I may die while I am protecting you does not appall me in the least. If I do, I shall be happy to have done what I have to preserve your lives and way of life, and the sacrifice and effort on your part to rear me as a good citizen, educated and resourceful, are not wasted. So, although you will grieve, please do not be bitter. Know that I am smiling here as I write this at sea, that I am content, that I am doing what I want to do and what I must do. Be proud that you did a good job of rearing me to do what was my chief purpose. Live out your lives to the fullest without loneliness or pain. Wherever I am, I will be at peace, and if there is a heaven, I have a clear conscience and a clean soul. And know also that I love you above all, and that to me you are the grandest, dearest people in the world. The men and women we've discussed today were young, most under 25. I believe that the youngest was a Private David K. Manson, killed in the Philippines when he was only 19. As we ponder their sacrifice, let us ask ourselves, as their fellow Bruins and fellow Americans, what can we do to honor their lives as well as their deaths? How can we live our lives to repay the debt we owe these men and women? we can remember them, their deeds, their faces, and their names. We can remember their unified purpose and make that our intent as well. Democrat, Republican, Independent alike, let us all stand and give these men and women our deepest, most heartfelt thanks.